So as you can see, guys, on this class opener, we're dealing with two functions, f of x and g of x, and they're asking us to do different things with these functions. So this right here is just notation, f of 3, that's how you read it, f of 3. All you got to do is plug in 3 into your f function. So if you look, your f function's right here, 2 of x, f of x is 2x minus 1. So you're going to take this 3 and plug it right into the x. So first rewrite it, 2, but instead of x, you put parentheses, minus 1. So once again, you're going to plug in this 3 right in there, which means you're going to plug it in right in here. So you're going to have a 3 right there. That's 2 times 3, that's 6. 6 minus 1 equals 5. So f of 3 really equals 5. Just going to do a couple of these. Let's check out something like number 3. It's a little more interesting. That's where you take f of negative 2 and then add it with g of 2. Okay, f of negative 2 and add it with g of 2. So if I plug in negative 2 into f of x, you're going to have 2x minus 1, and we said we're plugging in a negative 2 right there. And the g of 2, you take the g function, which is x squared plus 1, and you plug in a positive 2 into that one. And of course, we are adding both. Okay, so we're going to first figure out f of negative 2, and then we're going to figure out g of 2, and then we're going to add both of them together, both answers together. So f of negative 2, this guy over here, you do 2 times negative 2, that's negative 4. Negative 4 minus 1, that would be negative 5. And then over here you have 2 squared, which is 4, plus 1, that's positive 5. And we are adding them. So negative 5 plus 5, final answer is 0. Let me just jump to this guy down here. F of x plus g of x. Now you're probably thinking, wait a minute, where are the numbers? What am I supposed to plug in? You're not supposed to plug in anything. All you got to do is add f of x with g of x. So let's take our f of x function, which is 2x minus 1. You could put in parentheses if you want. And let's add it with our g of x function, so plus the g of x function, which is x squared plus 1. Now, notice there's nothing to distribute. Sometimes you have to multiply, so the parentheses are necessary. But right here, you're just adding them together, so the parentheses are really not necessary. All you have to do is combine like terms. So you should always start with the highest exponent, which is x squared. That's the first part of your answer. And then you could add the 2x with the, well, there is no other x, so you're just going to bring down the plus 2x. And then go for your numbers, which you have a negative 1 right here and a positive 1 over here, which means they cancel out. So technically, that's your answer right there for f of x plus g of x. Simply x squared plus 2x. I'm not going to go through all of them. Hopefully you guys have a good understanding of the class opener. Okay. So jumping from the class opener to page 385, we're going to see math operations with functions. Okay. So let's take a look at the notation. We need to really understand notation first. Now, we already know that f of x plus g of x means for you to add the f of x function with the g of x function, which just means combining like terms. However, this is the notation that the book uses, f plus g of x. This does not mean to add f plus g and then multiply by x. It simply means take your f of x function and add it with your g of x function. So this is just notation. This means this. You guys get it? This means this. F minus g of x is the same thing as f of x minus g of x. Same thing with this guy. F times g of x is really saying take f of x and multiply it with g of x. Okay? Now, yeah, sometimes I'll just write this as the instruction, but you might have this as a notation that really means this. So this is just different notation. F over g of x really means f of x divided by g of x. Now this right here is kind of like a little detail that we always need to mention whenever we have fractions with variables on the bottom. You don't want your denominator to equal 0. Okay, because if it were 0, then the whole thing would be undefined. Anyways, that's just notation. And we can look at some examples down here. Example 1, they give you f of x, they give you g of x, and they ask you to do f plus g of x. Now, what does f plus g of x mean? It means f of x plus g of x. So you simply take your f of x function, put it right here, take your g of x function, put it right here, and then add them together. Now, yeah, you plug in with parentheses just in case you have to distribute anything, but there is no distribution. Even the plus sign, if you distribute it, it doesn't change anything. So you could just forget about the parentheses and start combining like terms. X squared is the first term, and then positive 2x is the second term, and the negative 4 plus 1, you could actually combine those and you'll get the negative 3 that you get here. And there's your answer. You guys want this on the quiz Friday? Yeah. Heck yeah, right? You're just adding and subtracting, right? The second part, f minus g of x. Again, f minus g of x really just means f of x, take away g of x. Now right here it is important that you plug in with parentheses. So it's important that you take the f of x function, x squared minus 4, and put it right here with parentheses. Take your g of x function, 2x plus 1, plug it right here with parentheses. That way you'll remember to distribute the minus sign that's between the f of x and g of x. If you forget to distribute that minus sign, you're not going to get the right answer. So you have to take that minus and distribute it, which means you have a negative 2x minus 1, and now you're able to combine like terms. Obviously, x squared is the first term. That's why it's right there, the first term. Then you go for your x term, which is negative 2x. There it is, negative 2x. And the last one, you have to combine this negative 4, you have to combine it with the negative 1, and you get that negative 5 on the answer. So this is a super easy section. And we have some practice down here. How about you guys try in your notebooks 1A and 1B. I'm going to pause it, and then we'll go for the explanation or show the answers in a couple of minutes. So if you did your work correctly, you should end up with those two answers for 1A and 1B. I'm not going to show the work for the sake of the time on this video. Let's move on to the next page. This is page 386, and pretty much we've already covered adding and subtracting functions. Moving on to example 2, where we're multiplying and dividing functions. And right here they give us an f of x function and a g of x function. You can see it right here and here, okay? And they're asking us to do f dot g of x, f times g of x. So remember, this notation is really just f of x times g of x. So you simply take this guy and plug it in right here to f of x in parentheses. And you take this guy, plug it in for g of x in parentheses. And then you have to do a lot of distribution, a lot of combining like terms, and you're going to get this cubic polynomial answer. Okay. Likewise, f divided by g of x down here, f divided by g of x is really just f of x divided by g of x. So you put this quadratic trinomial up on top, and you take this binomial on the bottom, and then you reduce if possible. You simplify if possible, but you can't reduce because when you think about factoring, you're supposed to try and factor the x squared minus 7x plus 12, which you could, x plus 3 and x plus 4. Whoa. But as you can see, the x plus 3 or the x plus 4 is not on the bottom. It would be nice if you had an x plus 3 down here. That way you could cancel the x plus 3. Or the x plus 4. If you had an x plus 4 down here, you could cancel the x plus 4. But because you can't cancel out anything, it's pointless to factor. So you would just leave it like that. Now notice what they wrote right here in addition to the answer. X cannot equal 4/3. What the heck? Where did they get that from? What does that mean, guys? What that means is that the denominator, what will mess up a fraction? What if you have 1 in the denominator? If you have 0 in the denominator, that'll mess up your fraction. So think about this, guys. Whenever you have an answer like this, you have to state what your x value cannot be. So what I would do, what you're supposed to do, is to take the 3x minus 4 and say, I don't want the 3x minus 4 to be 0. Okay, I don't want the 3x minus 4 to be 0. So if I were to solve, then that means that 3x cannot be 4, which means that x, which means that x cannot be 4 over 3. Does that make sense? All I did was I set this denominator equal to 0 because I don't want it to be equal to 0. 3x minus 4 cannot be 0. And that's exactly what I wrote. 3x minus 4 cannot be 0. Okay? So then I just solved it like if it were an equation. I added 4. So 3x cannot be 4. And then I divided by 3. So I end up with x cannot be 4/3. Because if x was 4/3, I'd end up with a 0, and that would make it undefined. Okay? So, how about you guys try 2b right now? Or not 2b. Okay, that wasn't, sorry. So, all you got to know is that f over g of x really means f of x divided by g of x. Okay, so what's the f of x function? It's x squared minus 7x plus 2. And the g of x function happens to be x plus 4. Now, once again, always try to factor the top and see if you might end up with the x plus 4. That way you could cancel the x plus 4s. But you can't factor the top, so you just leave it like that. That's your answer. However, what detail do we want to throw in there? That x cannot be what? Negative 4. Perfect. There you go. That's the extra detail. This is your answer, but you need this so it can't be undefined. X cannot be negative 4. So let's jump to page 387. And example 3, we're not going to do that one because I don't like it. But let's take a look at, oh, wait a minute. This notation. We need this for sure. Now, it kind of looks like f times g of x, but look, it's not a multiplication, it's an open circle. Okay? So this is called a composite function where you have f of g of x. So this notation is the same thing as this notation. So what does this actually mean? It means that you're going to take your g of x function and plug it inside your f of x function. Okay, this is as confusing as it gets. I shouldn't say confusing. This is as fun as it gets, right? You take your g of x function and plug it inside your f of x function. Now, if you had something like this, then you're going to be taking your f of x function and plugging it inside your g of x function. Does that make sense? So the notation for this bottom one that I just wrote, that would be g of f in brackets and then of x. That's the same thing as this. To be honest, I hate this notation. I always write it with this notation. The f of x inside the g of x. Or the g of x inside the f of x. Okay? So let's take a look at an example down here. They give you f of x and g of x, and they want you to find out f of g of x. So that really means that you're going to take your g of x function and plug it inside your greater f of x function. It depends on the order it has it. So you're going to take your g of x function, your 4a, and you're going to put it where? Inside your f of x function into the variable location. Does that make sense? So I want to take the 4a and plug it inside the variable location of the f of x function. So I really have, if you think about it, 2 parentheses plugging in the 4a minus 5. There it is, 2 parentheses plugging in the 4a minus 5. Which means that my final answer is 8a minus 5. I shouldn't have circled it, sorry. But yeah, there's your final answer, 8a minus 5. So it's really that simple, where you just take one function and plug it into the other. Now, I need you guys to get comfortable with the notation. For example, if I would have said g of f of x, that would mean for you to plug in your f of x inside your g of x. So what would that look like? Well, you would say, what is my g of x function? My big function, g of x, is 4a. I want to put 4 parentheses. And I'm simply going to plug in my 2a minus 5 right in there. It's going to be 2a minus 5 right in there. That'll be 8a minus 20 as a final answer.